The 2025 Southern Summer Conference with USTA Louisiana, Dr. Mark Kovacs, the Tennis Fitness Combine.
Well, thanks everyone. If there's any questions from the first session that you want to ask now, that's totally fine. I've kept this one pretty wide open on purpose. The title of it is the Tennis Fitness Combine. And the reason I use that title is we have a little program that we developed probably a decade ago that was designed for high schools, academies, places that didn't have a lot of resources to spend, so it doesn't really require a lot of equipment, but it's a handful of tests that pretty much you can use with any level tennis player that doesn't require equipment outside of a medicine ball and some tennis balls. You do it on the tennis court, and it's a combination of different tests that you can do to test tennis fitness. So there's speed tests, there's agility tests, there's endurance tests, there's some basic flexibility tests, and it doesn't take very long. You can get the whole thing done in about 30 minutes or less. So if you're interested in testing, that's the cheapest option with the best data, because some of that data we have is nearly 50 years of longitudinal data now. So it's a whole series of tests. I'm not going to show all the tests today, but I wanted to just there's a resource out there if people are looking for it. Today, what I want to talk about is what are tests that we can do, why do you test at all, what's the reason behind it, and what makes sense for your population group. So the first thing is, testing is two-pole. One is you got to know where they are today, and you got to hope to figure out where you want to get them to. So if you're adult league, should you be doing testing? 100%. Like, I feel like they get the short end of the stick when it comes to tennis sometimes. Many of them are committed more than many of the juniors. Many of them want to get better faster. Many of them actually have the time to put into some of this stuff. Yet, how many of you that work with adults have ever done any testing with them? Anyone? Well, kind of shame on us, eh? We have this population group that is looking to get better, most of them. You know, they have, many of them, the time to put in a training program to actually work on that, and it'll make them better tennis players. So we're talking about fitness today, but you could do testing on the tennis side as well. Set up targets, have them hit to targets, record their results, say, hey, you made 3 out of 10 forehands down the line this week. In a month, we want to get to 5, or we want to get to 10, or whatever it is. So think of it, today I'm just going to narrow it to the fitness side, but you can do testing for any aspect of the game. But in general, you want to give them something to work on. So on speed tests, so just running straight ahead is a real simple test. So the most simple one to do on a tennis court, start on the baseline, you run all the way on the side of the court to the opposing service line. And you can just use a stopwatch to test that. So stopwatch is a little inaccurate compared to timing gates, or now there are some things on your phone you can actually get, an app that will allow you to test. You just got to stand far enough back that you can get the whole screen on your app, and you can actually time on that. And does anyone have any idea what a top pro should run from the baseline to the service line on the other side?
3 seconds.
Yep, exactly. Under 3 seconds is kind of where we need to be. If you want to play professional tennis these days, you pretty much need to be that on the men's side. On the women's side, it's not that much slower. It's right at 3 or 3.1 is kind of where a lot of the women will fall. So the guys are usually at 2.8, 2.9. Women are about 3.1, 3.0. So if your players are trying to play college, let's say junior players, and they want to play at the college level, 3.0 is a really good goal. At 12, they're probably going to be 3.5 seconds or 3.4 seconds. But that's a real simple test. You do it once a month as motivation. Hey, we're going to have our testing day. We're going to have fun, go run, see if we got better. There's 2 ways that we get into trouble with testing. One is, do we compare kids to other kids? If you're at the high performance level, 100%. You have to, because that's their world. It's a merit-based system. How do you get graded on whether you go to college or whether you play pro or whether you make money? Rankings or ratings. That's it. That's our life. That's the world we live in. So having leaderboards, having all those things and showing where they compare and trying to get better is what high performance is. Anyone that sort of tries to shy away from that isn't really living in a high performance world. The challenge with high performance is there's a lot of players that hate that. They don't want to be compared to others. They are scared of competition to an extent. It hurts us from a participation perspective if we make everyone live in that world. There's probably 20% of people max that probably live in that competitive world. And we know who they are. They're the 3-5 league ladies that cheat left and right because they want to win one extra point. It's the junior players that want to play and want to play tournaments every week of their life. They don't really want to practice. They want to just play tournaments. But that's a real small percentage of who we're talking about. And we have to be careful, obviously. Most of you are at clubs. You work with a lot of different levels. Is if we try to force everyone into that high performance mold, we lose players that don't like that, don't like the competition, don't like the conflict either of that world. So we have to be really, really careful. I live in that world 95% of the time. So that's what I do. That's who I deal with. And you have to succeed in that world if you want to move up. That's the environment. But when it comes to testing, we have to be really careful on how we apply testing to large numbers if you're working with groups. You really want to do testing against themselves. And testing may be a bad term. It's really tracking. Tracking is another way to use a language, a terminology that may be less scary for some folks. Or, people get pressure when they feel like testing. It's like anytime we take a test in school, I hated taking tests. I was always like, the test day, everyone gets a little nervous going into test day. So call it tracking or call it monitoring. Those two are a little less scary for a lot of people, but it's the same concept. We're getting data, we're getting metrics, and we're trying to see where are we today and where are we taking them. So the speed test is one that everyone should do. Very quick, very easy, but again, how you communicate that is challenging. If you're in a high performance type academy world, you may do leaderboards and things like that. Some people hate leaderboards, some people love leaderboards. Leaderboards work for the best players. It definitely works because it gives you a carrot, it gives you a goal, it gives you something to attain. But it also hurts the people many times who are really low on the leaderboard. No one likes to be last or second last or things like that. That's not a good feeling. So the balance is, how do you do that? And does anyone have any experiences on how they utilize tracking or testing or progression in larger numbers when you're at a club or when you're in an environment like that?
We do relays, like you split up the levels and start from 2 players as far as the running.
Yeah, so you try to mix the levels so that it's a more team-based or group-based activity. I think that's really, really good to allow people to hide a bit. So you're sort of trying to hide the levels a bit, and it's more group environment, so no one's singled out. I think that's really, really good for large numbers. And then if you do have those higher level groups, you have to separate those out sometimes and have them live in a bit of a different environment. So I think it's a really good suggestion. Anyone else that does some form of, does anyone do leaderboards, whether it's on tennis rankings for courts and things like that? So you got court 1 is your best players, court 6 are your not so good players, and you try to get them to move up and down courts? People are doing that or not? Some? Yeah. We have to an extent, because if they're going to play competitive tournaments or matches, that's how competitive tournaments are. Everyone knows who's better or worse. It's not like a secret, that player's better than this player. People may not always admit it, or parents may not always admit it, but the players all know. They know who the better players are in the groups. But it's how do you communicate it, and how do you give the encouragement to the layers of player? And I think that's where we sometimes mess up, is we shy away too far from competition sometimes without saying, how do we communicate it appropriately for the levels that we're talking about? And that's the biggest challenge when it comes to a lot of this. So next fitness test, because we're going to jump through a few different ones. So how many of you have done the spider test? Anyone know what the spider test is? If you don't, okay, it looks like some don't. So I'll show you at least how to set it up. Does anyone want to do it? Anyone want to run? It takes about 20 seconds for most of you. Anyone? I guess no one's jumping out. This is unusual. A group of active tennis coaches that doesn't want to get out there. There's usually a few. Yeah, you don't have to go fast. Come on, your racket, Wayne. Anyone want to do it? You can walk it even. How about that? We've lowered the standards so much. Awesome. Well, thank you. And don't go too fast. You go pretty slow. So, I got 5 balls. Why do we do this? Because we've always done it. That's why we do this test. Literally, that's why we do this test. And there's some value to that because we have 50 plus years of data. Like the earliest good data that I've seen on this test was from 1988. It was done in Hilton Head. You had the Sports Science Committee kind of the USTA was just getting started. It wasn't called that yet. Stan Smith was involved in a camp for the best juniors in the country. And you had Lindsay Davenport, you had Sampras, you had Agassi, you had all that group of players was being tested. So that was the first sort of official data that I could find that was trustworthy because I knew the people that were doing it. So they shared it. And since then, it's been done pretty much, I would say it's the most recognizable tennis test out there over the last 50 years. So if you're not familiar with it, that's okay. You're learning something new. If you are familiar with it, do you utilize it? And do you know kind of where people should be? So the way you set it up, you put a ball on each of these corners. So there's 5 balls. So it's sometimes called 5-ball pickup, spider test or 5-ball pickup. You can use both names. And then the goal is, I always, because of standardization, with timing, we always go anti-clockwise. I'm not sure why anti-clockwise, but I think it was a right-hander probably came up with that. And they move into their right first time. So you go that ball, this ball, this ball, this ball. And each ball you got to bring back and you got to drop it on the racket. Okay, so the goal here is to go as fast in and out of the corners as you can, but please don't go fast. You haven't warmed up yet. So just take it easy. I don't think you've warmed up anyway. So I don't want it to go too fast, but at least you just kind of see how it goes. So what you would do, now with phones, we can get our timing device, the high-end timing device that we have here. Okay, ready, go. So you goes down, picks up, put the ball on the strings. This is one way to do it. Good. That was 19.5 seconds. That was actually really good for someone who not even warm. That was awesome, actually. So, pretty simple test, yeah? Not hard to do, pretty hard to screw up, really. So you can do it with 8-year-olds, you can do it with 9-year-olds. You don't need to be a pro to do this. The racket is a good goal. When you're working with your pros, we remove the racket usually, actually, because we want them to go even faster, and the racket makes them slow down a little bit. So I remove it when we're trying to get the fastest possible. But the younger ages, the racket's actually really good because they have to slow down, they have to coordinate, and they have to place it. So they actually have to decelerate more than normal. So the goal generally, so the top pros are doing that, and on the men's side is under 15 seconds. They're in the 14s, usually the best ones. Ladies are usually about a second slower most of the time. So you're at 15 to 16. So anything under 16 to 17, that kind of range for juniors is pretty good. You want to try to get under 16 for the guys, under 17 for the ladies, and that sort of gives you a good framework. So that's a really, really good, useful test that you can all do, and you can do it in pretty large numbers. Because let's say you got a lot of kids in a group, you can have 5 kids on each court, 6 kids on each court, because you've got to give them a bit of rest so they can do it. Someone puts the balls back, and the next person goes, someone puts the balls back, and you just keep it going. So it's pretty easy to do in large groups. So if you do it one time, it's a speed test. If you do it repeated times, and if it takes, let's say it takes 20 seconds to do that. You're working with younger kids, it takes you 20 seconds to do that. How much, if you were going to do it for a tennis-specific endurance test, how would you utilize it? So a speed test, it's one time. You want to give at least 90 seconds rest before you would do anything after that, because you want to let the recovery of the ATP PC system happen. You want to get all your recovery timeline at least 90 seconds, ideally 3 to 5 minutes, but most of you aren't going to wait 3 to 5 minutes to get someone fully recovered. But if you're going to use that after practice, which a lot of people do, then it becomes much more of a tennis-specific endurance test, and you're going to do reps of that. So let's say if you did 5 reps of that, your recovery time usually about 3 to 1. So if it's, let's say it's 20 seconds of work, a 3 to 1 ratio, or 1 to 3 work to rest ratio, will be about 60 seconds of rest. So for every work set they do 60 seconds of recovery, and you do 5 reps of that. So you're going through that in 5 minutes. So for 5 minutes, you do 5 of those, and that's a pretty good tennis-specific endurance exercise. Not a full workout, it's only 5 minutes. They haven't done much, but it's a pretty good piece of a bigger workout. So a lot of people misunderstand that the exercise by itself doesn't tell us what we're working on from if you said, is this an agility test? Is this a speed test? Most people would say yes. But then I would ask the question, if you do it one time, you're correct, as fast as you can. If you do it 5 times with 60 seconds rest in between, it's not necessarily a speed test. It's a tennis-specific endurance test, because you're trying to recover between each one, and that's actually what you're really working on, not so much just the speed. So think about that when you're doing testing is, are we testing for one specific component, or are we testing for a different type of component? So questions on that, because that one gets used a lot.
It's kind of different, but has anyone done research on doing these drills with racket in hand versus no racket?
Yeah.
Just grabbing balls?
Yeah, so rackets, there's 2 aspects to it. One is the racket piece. You can definitely swing and not even have a ball. The problem with that is it's harder to standardize. So the data that you're collecting, if you're going to time it, is going to be a little different. So we've done it for sure. We've done it where we'll have them just shadow swing on each of the locations. That's a drill. The problem with that is how much do they shadow swing, and if they're doing it for time, they usually screw up the swing. Yeah, so you can definitely do it with a racket, but what does that add?
Maybe with the racket in hand. But, I'm seeing tons of kids. Tennis sometimes is their beginning sport,
Yep.
and they're not coming from a lot. So I question, why are we going through these suicides and stuff without a racket in hand, and then we're going to feel awkward moving with our racket?
Yeah, so 2 things. There's nothing wrong with doing it with a racket. For most of the people, they're hitting a lot of tennis balls and they're using the racket so much. This is not really a tennis drill. It's a fitness test or movement test. It's not even really a tennis footwork test, because they're running in a straight line. They're not running towards the ball. So it's not mimicking that. What you're describing is great, but that's more of a tennis movement test or assessment, which would be with a racket. But then you'd want to move not necessarily as fast as you can in a straight line. You'd want to move like a tennis footwork. And that's why this test a lot of the time gets done by fitness coaches, strength coaches, people that may not have your knowledge of tennis. So if you're going to do tennis movement sessions, which I think is more what you're describing, that's great. The question then is, do we test that? And there are some tests out there where you will shadow swing. The problem I've always had when you start doing shadow swinging and timing is they start short arming the swing. So then you're defeating the purpose a little bit, because if you're trying to get to a forehand and they do this, they're out of the shot before they've actually done it, because they want to get back to the center so fast. And so I always just warn people, if you're going to do timing with full swings, make sure you enforce good technique. Otherwise, you're sort of defeating the purpose. You may as well just run, get to the spot without the racket. So it's a really, really good point. And again, when they're younger, yeah, do more stuff with the racket in hand. With a lot of the older ones that are pretty good players, they move with the racket so much that test doesn't really add a lot if we add the racket into it. It's a good point, though.
Just kind of building on that, do you have to do it where you always bend down and pick up something, or just run and touch with your foot and run back? Like the bending down obviously is tougher.
Yeah, so the question was, do you always need a ball and to bend down and pick up and things like that? No, you can do it however you want. It's just we have much more normative data based on that. So there's nothing wrong with doing it with your foot. We do that most of the time if we're just doing a training session. We probably won't pick up the balls because we're not really necessarily concerned what their time is. But if we're doing a true test, that's a standardization issue. So the normative data we have is 50 years of information based on picking up a ball. The moment you don't pick up a ball, all that data is worthless because it's not comparing the same thing. And there is some data on just your feet as well. You usually go about a second to a second and a half faster if you don't have to pick up the ball. So yeah, great questions. So just remember that true testing means that there's a standardization to it. There's a consistency and a repeatability to it, that if I do it, if you do it, if we do it next month, it's always going to be you can replicate. If you start making all the adjustments you're all suggesting, which are all fair, they were great drills, then you can't compare to whatever it was. So if you're going to do your own types of tests or you're going to tweak things because of what you're trying to work on, nothing wrong with that. It's just you then can't compare your player to someone in California who's doing the same test because they're doing it slightly different. So that's the risk of all the little adjustments, because you're all right, they're all great adjustments, but then you lose that standardization and you lose the ability to compare. It's kind of similar to scoring in tennis. If we started doing, 4-game sets, 6-game sets, 10-point breakers versus 7-point breakers, and then you have all the stats on points won, matches won, statistics, can't compare eras. And we're starting to see that a bit at the junior level anyway. Doesn't mean the scoring systems are right or wrong. No one's saying it's better or worse a lot of the time. It's just different and it's hard to compare. Yeah, great point.
Is anything that shows up really interesting in that 50 years of analysis of time in that drill? Anything stand out to you that's changed over the 50 years?
No, really. The athletes aren't much faster. As much as people are like, oh, the athletes are so much better today, the depth of athlete at the highest level is better, but the top athletes are very similar. So because they're great genetic athletes. The training now is a little bit more on recovery. They can do it for longer sometimes in career longevity, not necessarily, they're not necessarily fitter. We actually looked at some stuff regarding juniors recently, and the aerobic capacity of most juniors today is worse as a whole than it was 30 years ago. Partly because training's changed. They're on the couch more. They're more phones when they're younger. They're not playing multiple sports at a young age as much, so they're not doing cross country. They're not doing soccer as much. The tennis athletes aren't. So they're not getting the aerobic training that they used to. And I always ask this question, how many of your athletes can run 3 miles tomorrow? When you go back to your clubs tomorrow and you say, hey, go run 3 miles, how many of them, one, would be able to finish without walking? That's goal number one. Run consistently for 3 miles. And then the second is, what is their time? Like, how quickly can they do it? You guys laugh for a reason. Like, 30 years ago, pretty much everyone could run 3 miles. Like, it's not about being a great athlete. It's just being able to, put one foot in front of the other for 20 minutes. That's all it is. It's 20 minutes, give or take, of activity. 20 to 25 minutes is where most people should be able to do 3 miles in. And I would ask you to go back to your clubs and have everyone run for 20 minutes. Don't have to say 3 miles, but just run for 20 minutes and see how many can actually do that without stopping. If they can't do that without stopping and they're playing competitive tennis tournaments, they're not going to do very well. Because if you just can't do that, how are you meant to play matches, multiple matches in a day?
Maybe a silly question, but if you're like going to run 20 minutes in tennis shoes, you want them to have like running shoes to do it?
I don't care. Like, yes, ideally we'd like running shoes on grass, on a soft surface. Yeah, that would be the best way to do it long term. But at a 12, 14, 16-year-old, it doesn't matter. They can run on pavement. They can run on anything. You know, they should be able to. Obviously, if they're going to run 3 days a week, they're going to do it consistently. Yeah, softer surfaces, better shoes, things like that. But realistically, you know, we've softened the environment too much for most people, and then we want them to compete at a high level. It doesn't work. If you want to compete at a high level, you got to train at a high level. You know, training needs to be harder than matches. I'm not saying this is hard. I'm just saying many of you like think I'm crazy for suggesting that. I could see the response. But if we had this discussion 30 years ago, that would have been a warm-up. You do 20 minutes of running and then you go into your practice. That wasn't a training session. Now, if you say go run for 20 minutes, people are like, oh, I don't know if they can do that. Or that may be too hard for them. You know, we're creating, you know, a difficult situation for them. But that's unfortunately a bit of the problem. The best ones are doing it. You know, the best players in the country, the top level, they're in good shape. Their capacity's good. You know, they're able to do it. But the vast majority that are trying to compete with some of them, not saying pros, but just saying people that want to play to a college level, a decent college level, if they're not able to do that at 12, 14, 16 years old, that's not healthy, really, bigger picture wise, let alone the tennis side, but should be able to do stuff. It's like saying, can they do pull-ups? We should, every 12 to 14-year-old should be able to do 10 pull-ups. We're not asking them to do something crazy, but same question. If you had tomorrow and you go to your clubs and say, we're going to do 10 pull-ups, I would guess, based on the data I've seen and the people I've been around watching it, I would say less than 20% of your 14-year-olds could do that right now. And that's a big problem. I mean, just general athleticism. This has got nothing to do with tennis-specific stuff, but first off, we always talk about we want to have better athletes in the sport. We want to have better athletes, more well-rounded, more developed, but what are we doing to help with that? And I get it, you're all trying to teach tennis and you're trying to do the tennis side, but you also have facilities that you have space. Tennis courts are a large space. You can do a lot of stuff on a court, and you can help them develop some of those athletic skills in different ways.
You mentioned the adults that like have free time, maybe more invested than the juniors.
Mm-hmm.
Even them, sometimes like we get to a point and they're like, I want this, and then I'll bring up like fitness or like same kind of exercises, and then they laugh at me like, oh yeah, that's too far.
Yeah, well, that's obviously an adult player, club player. They're gonna tell you if they want to do something or not. You're giving them thoughts, and then it's up to them if they want to commit or not commit. It's their world. You're not pushing adult league players very often. It's more providing questions. Would you like to try this? Would you want to do this? Some will be all in and they'll go ahead. Others will be like, no, I'm good. I just want to hit and do my hour twice a week, and I'm good with that. Others are like, no, I want to go from 3.5 to 4.0 or 3.5 to 4.5. Well, if you want to do that, you may need to get a little fitter. You may need to get a little faster. You may need to work on some things in addition to just your strokes and strategy. So putting out the question is goal number one, and then getting the answer determines what your next steps are. Really, really fair point. So when we go the next test, so we've got some agility, we've got some speed. What good endurance tests? So we've got a 20-minute run, which is a good one. See how far they can run in 20 minutes, or work backwards. Run 3 miles, record the time. So if you've got access to a track or treadmill or something like that, you can do it in that environment. The other one is anyone heard of a beep test? You know what that is? It's a 20-meter shuttle run. You can do it on a tennis court. That's why I kind of like it. So you need 20 meters. So you make a marker at 20 meters, and there's an app you can actually download. It's called the Beep Test, and you can just download the app and you have them run. Really simple. Usually people run as far as they can in this 20 meters back and forth. The reason it's sort of easy and useful is it doesn't really cost anything. The app, there's free apps you can download, so it's on a metronome. So they have to get the 20 meters, the distance. So if we have a cone 20 meters apart, you have to get from one cone to the next before the next beep. That's why it's called the beep test. And the beeps get faster and faster. So you got to run actually faster as the test goes on. So early on, it's like really, really slow. You kind of, running at that speed, and then it goes up to a full sprint at some point. Most people drop out before they get to the full sprint. They don't have the capacity to keep going faster and faster. And the reason it was done was to be able to estimate accurately VO2. Does everyone know what VO2 is? Volume of oxygen. So the VO2 max test, which many of you may have heard of, is historically a lab test. You wear a mask, you breathe in and out to what's called a mixing chamber. So you're breathing out CO2, you're breathing in O2, and as you run faster and faster, your volume of oxygen number goes up and up. So there was a group about 35 years ago that was like, how do we do this with large numbers, not in a lab, not with a $100,000 piece of equipment, which is what a good VO2 machine costs. So they developed this beep test to allow us to replicate or estimate based on that someone's VO2. So based on the beep test, you can come up with a VO2 number. Does anyone know what VO2 is measured in, what the units are? Anyone? No, so it's measured in milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute of exercise. Milliliters per kilogram per minute. That's the units. So for it's worth kind of learning that number. The reason being is it's becoming very, very popular now to talk about in general health aspects. It's one of the biggest correlations with longevity, actually. So for coaches, all of you, if you want to lift to 100, which is kind of the goal nowadays for a lot of people, that's one of the strongest correlations with living long time is your aerobic capacity. So getting your VO2 as high as possible is a goal now. And there's a lot of ways to do it, but generally it's aerobic conditioning. So,
sports tend to be the highest?
So which sports? So the sports that have the highest VO2 are cycling, Tour de France cyclists, marathon runners, cross-country skiers. Those are the big three. But they're aerobic sports. They're 100% aerobic, pretty much. Tennis is an intermittent sport. We're not a true aerobic sport. We require a lot of aerobic conditioning because we're out there for hours and hours and hours. But we know points are short, 3, 4, 5, 10 seconds. That's our world. We live in 3 to 10 second points 90% of the time. And we have 20 to 30 seconds recovery between each point. So you have a lot of recovery time. We're not constant. And we have 2-minute breaks, give or take, every 10 minutes or so for changeovers. So tennis has a lot more recovery than work. We studied that a lot. What is the recovery time in tennis versus the work time? At the pro level, it's 1 to 5. So for every second of work, there's 5 seconds of rest. So, for every minute, they rest 5 minutes. So if you think about tennis, you're not playing very much. It's less than 20% of total time is played. So tennis isn't a true heavy aerobic sport. But there's a lot of aerobic components to tennis, and having a high aerobic capacity is huge for the recovery piece of it. So tennis players, so to put it in context, Tour de France, top cross-country skiers, marathon runners, their VO2s, males are above 70. Sometimes they're getting close to 80 is the unit you'll hear a lot. Females are usually 5 to 10 below that. So if men are between 70 and 80 at the highest levels, the top females are about 65 to 70. So that's in those sports. In tennis, the best guys are above 60. They're 60 to 65 usually. The best girls are about 55 to 60. And that's comparable to some soccer players. That's comparable to a lot of other sort of a bit more intermittent sports. So what's the relevance of all that? That's just saying that if we want to understand that, it's pretty valuable, but that beep test allows us to get those numbers without going into a lab, without spending a ton of money, and it's a very well validated and reliable test. So that's something that you can do with large groups as well. The reason people really like that one, you can get 20 or 30 athletes at once to do that test, and they drop out. It's really a dropout test. You know, some coaches will call it, we're doing the dropout test today, because at some point you drop out of the test. You don't make the cone in the time frame that you need to, and you get one sort of warning, and then the second time you don't make the cone in time, that's the end of the test for you. And that gives you a number, and that number then gives you a VO2 number on top of that.
Mark, Andy Roddick has a really popular broadcast. He asserted recently that tennis players are the best athletes in the world. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, so I've done a number of media interviews taking that position. So if anyone ever needs someone to defend them on that, come to me. I've got plenty of data to support the argument that tennis players are, at the professional level, I use the word toughest because that riles people up, because they're like, oh, well, they don't get hit in the face like boxers. They don't, have 300-pound people falling on them like the NFL. But tennis is the toughest sport. You can make that argument legitimately. And I said, if we ever debated in a court of law, I think I would have enough evidence to win the case, because it's the only sport that's an 11-month season. There's no other sport that's an 11-month season. That's number one. The pros travel over 100,000 miles a year. Major League Baseball and the NBA are the next closest. They travel only about 50,000 miles a year. So more than double those sports in air travel time. The next one is you only make money if you win, which nearly most other sports now, there's guaranteed contracts a lot on the way in the big sports anyway. So there's a psychological stress and pressure that isn't accounted for in most of these other sports. And then you start getting into the one-on-one competition. So there is no timeouts. You have to play when you're sick if you want to make money. You have to play when you're injured if you want to make money. You have that pressure. And then the physical aspects of it. Tennis players are never going to have the highest vertical. They're never going to win the bench press competition in the NFL Combine. They're never going to run a marathon in around 2 hours. They're not going to be the best in the world at any one of those metrics. But when you add, if there was a decathlon comparing athletes, tennis would probably get really close to winning the decathlon of sport as well. Because they do have to have great endurance. They do have to have great speed. They do have to have great power, great agility. But they're never going to be at the absolute top of any one of those metrics compared to some other sports. But most other sports don't have to do everything like tennis does. So that's just a short, quick argument for it. But yeah, I could easily make the argument for that. And also, I've spoken to quite a few people. I was on, if you know baseball, Jeff Francoeur, who's played for the Braves for a lot of years. We had an argument with him about it, and he agreed, actually. He goes, are we talking about the hardest thing to do in sports? Because baseball guys always love saying that hitting the baseball is the hardest thing in sports to do, which may be the hardest skill to do. But he was 100% in agreement that tennis is the toughest overall sport because of all the things we just mentioned. So thanks for bringing that up, because we're biased, obviously, in this room. That's the sport we're involved with. But I think based on what I said, you all can take that information and, start ruffling some feathers in your towns and start getting people to get out to tennis a bit more. Because unfortunately, tennis gets sometimes a bad reputation as being, easier than some other sports, or kids that aren't as athletic. Tennis is like the backup sport for some people. And it's a shame, because it's truly, really challenging at the hardest levels. And we know how hard it is to teach as well. So the whole skill acquisition piece of tennis is a lot harder at the younger ages as well.
You mentioned earlier things have changed a lot less than people think in tennis.
Mm-hmm.
Roddick and McEnroe both bring up that the only real change they see is they don't think men under 5'10" are going to win anymore. And I don't know, the ladies, obviously they're smaller ladies, having success on tour. So if I'm dealing with players that are smaller, like how are we gonna compete with that? Like,
Yeah, no, it's
like, what is the,
yeah, it's a great point. I don't know if everyone heard that, but the one thing that was brought up was it's maybe hard for smaller players to compete at the highest levels. 5'10's a number that's used a lot. Historically, I mean, you got to go back to Laver era, but if you're color TV, I always say once color TV came out, there hasn't been many great tennis players under 5'10. I mean, there really hasn't been if you actually look. Hewitt's the last really, really good one, and he was right at 5'10 on the men's side. But even in that era, that was small. That was, you have to have exceptional other skills. So it's not that different than years past, but the heights have increased. But every sport's the same. Like if you go to the NBA, the average height in the NBA has gone up 3 inches over the last 50 years. The average height in the NBA is 3 inches higher than it was.
So if I have someone that's like has these lofty goals and they're not going to be 6 feet tall, should I be expressing like you have to be catching up on speed or something else?
I wouldn't even bring it up. I don't think we ever need to put down or concern ourselves with what may not be doable. I think we always frame it as, hey, you've got an advantage because you can move better, you can play faster, your defense has to be better because that's your game style. I base it on game style, not on height a lot of the time. Obviously, they all know, smaller players know they're small. We don't need to give them a stigma, though, either, because I think that is what some people do. I hear it all the time. Parents do it, coaches do it. Hey, you're going to be small, so we need you to do this. I would reframe that and say, hey, your game's built on speed and movement. We got to get you so good at speed and movement that it's such a weapon. Everyone's going to want to move like you. So it's the same general concept, but one's framed in the positive and the other's framed in something that could potentially hurt them in the long run or give them an out. The other thing you don't want to do is give people an easy excuse of why they're losing as well, which is never good. And you've got to improve their serve. Serve's always going to be a huge part of the game. So you've got to make sure it doesn't matter what height you are, that their mechanics, their loading, their ability to serve, their technique is optimized, because it doesn't matter what level you're at, serve is going to play a pretty significant role in whether you win or lose matches. Yeah, really well said. So what was said there, if you didn't hear it, was and I'm paraphrasing, there's straight ahead speed, which is baseline to service line. How fast can you run? Plenty of people that are fast out there. But movement in tennis is not about how fast you run in a straight line. It's about how, and your term was great, how much grace do you have on the court? And that's about, Roger Federer, for example. He's fast, but he's not top 10 in tennis in speed from baseline to service line. But I would argue best tennis mover probably of all time from a standpoint of grace or simplicity, efficiency, their ability to get to a ball, decelerate, hit, and then re-accelerate, and doing it in the least amount of steps needed at the fastest cadence possible while maintaining balance and executing the stroke, which is what we do as tennis players. We get to a ball to hit it. We don't get to a ball to run into another person like in the NFL or on track and field. We're not trying to run in a straight line as fast as possible with perfect technique. Tennis is all about reacting to a ball that's coming from an opponent, getting to the ball, setting up and executing, and repeating that in all these hundreds of different options in a match. The beauty of tennis is it's a chess game on a large court. You don't know what your opponent's going to do, but you have to react to that move, and then you have to think multiple moves ahead as well about, if I hit here, what are the percentages that they're going to hit here, and do I shift my movement slightly so I get one extra step ahead of time so my anticipation's better? And that's going to your point, which is a really good one, that just getting someone fast, if they don't know how to move on the court, is not enough. That's where tennis footwork, tennis movement, all of that, and all of that should mainly be happening in your sessions of hitting. You shouldn't be hitting without being focused on those pieces. If you're just hitting balls without taking into account the footwork and the precision of the footwork, you're wasting, unfortunately, the time, because you may work on technical stroke mechanics of the upper body, but the footwork and the movement has to be part of the training plan. So thank you for mentioning that. It's a really important point. Yeah. So the question there, if you didn't hear it, was throughout a tournament season, a schedule, a competitive player we're talking about, when do you develop speed and when do you develop endurance? Like, how does it fit within the bigger puzzle? And there's a few ways you have to go about it. One, you have to test first, because you've got to figure out, are they already pretty fast or are they really not very fast? If they're really fast, you probably don't have to prioritize that, because they're probably going to be slower at other things or worse at other things, and we've got to get those, because we always know we got to work on strengths, but if we have major weaknesses or areas of opportunity, we got to get them up to at least a neutral level, because they may never get to the strength levels of another component. But in tennis, if you've got a weakness anywhere, it's going to get exposed. So we have to work on that. So you've got to prioritize that to an extent. But throughout the time of year, speed needs to be done when they're fresher, typically, because speed is all about nervous system function. So how quickly can we get a signal from the brain to the muscle, and can we maximize and optimize that? You can't do that when you're tired. That's why you can't do speed training at the end of sessions. It's not speed training. Many coaches will be like, oh, we're doing our speed drills now. I'm like, you're not doing speed drills. You're doing drills that look like they're speed drills, but the body is fatigued enough that you're not actually maximizing speed development. You're doing a form of endurance, or anaerobic endurance, it's called in some areas. I call it tennis-specific endurance if you do it right. So you can't really do speed when they're tired. So going back to your point about when in the season, you have to work on speed and endurance most of the time. But I usually go about it where we do it early in the session. So as part of your dynamic warm-up, you have a speed block at the end of the dynamic warm-up. So that's a really good time to do it, because they're still fresh, they've warmed up, they're loose and ready to go. You haven't really started hitting tennis balls yet. So you have a 5 to 15 minute, depending on what level they are, area there where you're working on speed. And you can do that year round. So you have that ability to do that. You may have blocks where you do more of that and less of that. So that's one period to do it. The next is going to your endurance piece. So endurance, you need to work on that ideally in your tennis sessions. If you're really working with competitive players, there's an opportunity usually at the end of most practices. They're already a little fatigued. That's when you really put the hammer down and you say, the last 10 minutes of practice, we're going to do our pretty taxing drills where we're moving them. Technique shouldn't break down, but it may a little. You know, in these environments, we understand that. But we have to get that done usually at the end of practice. Could be at the end of the hitting, if it's a hitting-based conditioning, endurance kind of work. Or it could be right after practice, where you go to the field, you go to the track, you go to the treadmill, whatever it is, and then you bust them up pretty good during that period. Because we can get a lot of benefits training when fatigued for endurance, because that's what endurance is. It's getting your capacity up when you're already a little bit fatigued. So we can leverage the fatigue of the tennis practice to get us better in endurance by doing more work in that period of time. So that's on a daily schedule. Going to your point about when in the season do you put this together, that's a lot harder sometimes, because you want to have blocks of time where you can emphasize specific areas. So use a junior calendar. And junior calendars are terrible now because everyone plays a different schedule. So I don't know what your schedule is in the juniors. Some are playing UTR, some are playing the PPT stuff if you're good enough. Some are playing USTA, some are playing ITF. So there isn't a standard schedule. So it used to be 20 years ago, it's basically USTA nationals, sectionals, regionals, and you knew your year. Now it's crazy. So I always say, I don't know what schedule you're playing, but you've got to put in blocks of time. So I mimic it to what the pros do, because there's a lot of similarities. The good pros screw it up as well, unfortunately, because they want to play everything. Their agents are getting them appearance money here and there. They're playing extra tournaments for quick cash, which may actually hurt them for the bigger events. But in general, you want at least a 3-week block of training 3 to 4 times a year. That's the absolute minimum. And there's a lot of good science behind why 3 weeks is sort of needed. One is you need to come off whatever you were doing, so you need a little bit of recovery. And then you need at least 10 to 14 days to ramp up a training program of some sort. Longer is usually better, but in the world we live in, it's really hard to get. It used to be 4 to 6 weeks. You would have 4 to 6 week blocks of training, and then you'd go play 3 weeks of tournaments, something like that. Now, 2 to 3 weeks is about all you get with a lot of people. So you've got to try to find those blocks throughout the year. And then you would, like you mentioned, one block maybe we're a little more focused on strength and speed, you know, because we need to do work on that. One block we may be a bit more focused on endurance. It's really impossible to do high levels of speed and power with high levels of endurance in the same week. Like you can do all that in a week, and we do. We have a tennis-specific periodization model for players that are on the road. They'll do a speed session, they'll do an endurance session, they'll do a power session, they'll do a strength session, they'll do a movement session, all in 1 week. When they're on the road, it's a form of microdosing, if you've heard this term. So you're getting components of everything you need each week, so you don't get sore, so you can keep building a little bit, but you're not going to maximize any of those in that environment. You're going to maintain or improve a little bit. Whereas an ideal scenario is, if I got to get an athlete who's not very fast, I got to have a 3-week block of just speed where we're giving him plenty of rest and we're exploding, making him work at a rate of intensity that's higher than they've ever worked. It's called overspeed in track and field. You'll hear of overspeed training, where you actually run them faster than they can physically run themselves, and you use bungees and different things to get them there. So let's say they're running at 18 miles an hour, which is really fast. 18 miles an hour is their absolute max speed. We get a device on them that it can actually pull them. So it pulls me this way, and it takes me to 20 miles an hour. So it actually moves my leg faster than I can physically move it myself. There's an injury risk component to that, so that's why you don't recommend it usually with people that aren't highly trained. But it's just like strength training. How do we get stronger? We add more weight and we push close to a limit so that we can increase and the body adapts. The body adapts nervous system wise as well. And that's how you make someone faster. You don't just do the same thing they always do. You have to incrementally increase their speed over time and the body adapts. So, but you need enough time to do that, and you need to do it in a setting where they're not fatigued, which in tennis players are fatigued year round because that's what tennis is. It's 3 hours of practice, it's matches, it's traveling, it's all of that stuff. So we need a lot of recovery time to truly get speed better. And I know most of you don't live in that world, so that's unrealistic for most people. But I think it was worth mentioning that at least if you're having these conversations with folks, you can say, we can get you faster, but it's not going to get as fast as some people may say unless you give committed time to working on this. It's similar to working on a serve or a forehand. If you do 5 minutes on the forehand in the lesson and 5 minutes on the backhand, 5 minutes on volleys, 5 minutes on serves, you're going to get a little better at all of those, but you're not going to make any one of those strokes very good because you're just not putting in enough dedicated time to it. Same kind of issue. So what other areas on fitness? So power is one we haven't talked about. So med ball throws. Anyone do med ball throws? Okay. So the simplest way to do it is you get just a long tape measure and you use a 6-pound medicine ball. That's usually what we use for our standardization. And you throw, the way we usually do it, you do a line and you throw with your front foot on the ground, med ball here, and the front foot stays on the ground. The back foot comes through. So that's a standardized way we do it. So a lot of people will do it where you don't move your feet. The problem with that is it becomes an upper body movement. So we actually want the rotation because that's more specific to a forehand or a backhand. And we've got data on that technique. So that's a med ball throw. So about a 6-pound med ball. If you're working with the real young kids, we go 4 pounds. But you want, 6 pounds is enough for most people, that there's enough resistance, but it's not enough resistance that it changes mechanics. So I think with 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds, 20 pounds is heavy. You're like, not really doing a tennis stroke then. You're just trying to move heavy weight as quick as you can, which is a whole different thing. It's not a bad thing, but it's not really representative of ground strokes. So that's a fun one. They like that. Or one thing I do, because when we do standardization, we want to make sure that they stay within the doubles alley. So that's an accuracy thing. If you ever watch long drive golf, they have markers on sides, and if you go left or right of the marker, it's like a fail. It doesn't count. Kind of do the same thing with med ball throws because it keeps them from like throwing it all the way over here. And if you're working with kids especially, if you don't give them guardrails, what happens? Chaos. So we need a little guardrail to it, and the alleys like are here, so that's what we've always used as sort of our guardrails. You got to land it, let's say, in the alley for it to count.
Do you have a specific technique you're looking for in a medicine ball throw?
Yes. So one, throw it as far as you can, which is the goal. And the only way to throw it as far as you can is to have optimized lower body through core, upper body technique. So it's just like anything else. It's load the back hip. It's drive through the hips as much as you can. Hips come through, they turn. As the ball releases, the foot comes through. So it's very much a rotation-focused movement. That's the big emphasis. That's why you use med ball. That's why you do that. Otherwise, we would throw forward like that, or we would do a granny toss.
What about like arm versus straight arm?
So they can use whatever they want, but I'll tell you, they'll throw it much further with straight arms. Flexed arms isn't going to get anywhere near as far because straight arms, you get more rotation, you get more, but I usually don't coach them initially. I want to see what they do. I want to see where they're at on day one. And then over time, if I say, how would you throw it further? You try to get them to that point of adjusting their technique. And then it becomes a training drill, obviously, as well. So we test it to see where they're at, but you train that every week as part of your routine. When would that, if that's used as a training drill, let's say you do 10 of them. 1 on this side, 1 on that side. You do 10 on each side, 20. Plenty of rest. Because the goal, if it's for power, you want to give plenty of rest so they're fully recovered and they can truly explode. If you want to do it for repeatability, you may not do rest. You may just go and go and go, 10 on each. 2 different drills. So be careful that you're not thinking you're working on true power. If you're working on true power, you've got to give the recovery time. If you're working on repeatability of power, or power endurance it's called sometimes, then it's okay to do repeats as quick as you can, kind of like a point would be. So it's a really, really good point on, we can use that as training as well as testing.
On that med ball throw and on the ground strokes, like how much should their knee bend be changing? Like sometimes I see them popping up way too much, like kind of straightening their legs out.
Yeah, so we always talk about angles in versus angles out. So efficiency of movement in any real movement is, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. On the serve, we talk about it all the time. We need our angle to go back and down so we can go up and out. In rotation, same thing. We have to rotate this way, so we can rotate out of it, exactly the same. So it's the same thing when if they get to a ball here. So look at the angle coming in. Angle in, angle out. If my angle in goes to here, I'm screwed. My angle in versus the angle out needs to be similar. So if we go in this way and then pop straight up, we're losing a lot. The challenge with tennis is we have to hit balls. So we're actually going in on an angle. And that's where, if you ever work with strength coaches, movement coaches that come from other sports, soccer, football, stuff like that, they don't really get this piece of it. This is where they all mess up, not because they're not good coaches, because they don't understand the hitting a tennis ball piece. They understand the movement piece, and they're going to do everything they can to get you into the position well. The biggest problem is once you get here, that movement doesn't exist in any other sport. The actual load and transfer into the racket, into the ball, as a part of a movement sequence does not exist in any other sport. It's not even close. So that piece of it has to be done by you all. If you send your players to go to off-site fitness work and strength and conditioning and movement and whatever it is you're sending them to, don't expect them to fix that. Expect them to get them to the ball maybe faster. Expect them hopefully to have a little more stability when they get there so they're not as wobbly. But the actual load to stroke or load here coming out and then being able to move back, that piece has to be the domain of what you do. And we always talk about this. Who trains tennis footwork? Is it the fitness person or is it the tennis coach? Has to be the tennis coach. Has to be prioritized. The fitness person can work on pieces around it, but that piece is really difficult. If you've never played tennis, if you've never felt that, even if you play a little and practice, it's really difficult to do that well and teach that well if you don't have your backgrounds. So I always say the driver of tennis footwork is always the tennis coach. The fitness, strength and conditioning person can do a lot of things to make that environment better, more stable, stronger, more resilient on deceleration, all of this stuff that they'll do, and they'll do a really good job of. But if you're turning over all of the movement stuff to them and expecting them to maximize it and then it just magically shows up on court, it doesn't work that way. You need to still be engaged and involved in that piece of it. So this was a really good discussion. Great questions. Thanks again, Bill, and the entire team for putting this on. I'm excited for lunch.